Hi everybody, now I confess that I wasn't particularly excited about testing the Z180 to 600. In fact, I've kind of ignored it ever since it was released last year. I mean, how good can a 600mm that costs less than £2,000 actually be? I'll tell you what, it's worse than that. It's actually only about £1,800. So you get my point. It's also a super zoom, and I have a love-hate relationship with super zooms, usually ending in disappointment and heartache. You see, 500mm and above for me means it's got to be a prime. Prime lenses all the way. Now I've got that off my chest, I need to tell you that I'm in love with this lens. It's ridiculously good for the money. It's light, it's pointable, and I can even handhold it when it's at full chatter. That's 600mm. 600mm, it's ridiculous that I can handhold it. And the images, I just love the images. Let me show you why. Firstly, let me explain why, when I had a lens capable of 600mm in my hand, I only used it at 300mm for these particular images. Well, a couple of days before, I'd been in this hide using my 300 f2.8 VRii, and I wanted to compare both lenses at the same magnification. And I'll show you those in a minute. In the meantime, just let me enjoy the memory of using this lens. Enough of that, Sean. They want to see info and facts. So how about this? If I crop in again, and again, and again, and again, and again, you can see just how much detail that the 180 to 600 has captured. Impressive, isn't it? And just for info, the camera was set to manual, ISO 1600, aperture f6.3, and shutter 3200. And I was using a gimbal. I'm guessing that you want to see an image taken at 600mm, don't you? Here's one. Don't worry, I've got more. But first, it's time to compare the Z180 to the 300 VR2 at 300mm, as promised. Now, don't worry, you'll get to see more of the 180 at 600mm later, and it's worth waiting for. Honest. Do you know, I was really impressed with the Z180 to 600 because my 300mm normally outclasses most other lenses. It's so sharp. I think I need to zoom in a bit to see if there's a difference. Well, it's pretty sharp, isn't it? In fact, it's incredibly sharp. Now, this is with the 300mm VR2. Let's see how it compares. Well, I was kind of expecting it to be sharp, to be quite honest. I mean, I wouldn't expect anything else. But both lenses are pretty close, aren't they? Which is probably a surprise to some of you. Yep, they're pretty close indeed. Let's check out some different pictures. Zooming in to the Z180 to 600. Yes, it's a little noisy, but that could be because it was taken at 4000 ISO. Now let's take a look at the image from the prime 300mm lens, taken at 1000 ISO incidentally. Yes, I have to admit that that's a little bit sharper. Okay. So, have you had enough of the buzzards yet? Because I tell you something, there were also foxes. This was the Z100 to 400 that I bought for £2,000, though it seems to have gone up recently to 2,200. Don't know why. I suppose it's very popular. Anyway, these were taken at dusk, and I think you can see that I'm losing the light with both the Z mount lenses. Whereas I must admit I was luckier with that last shaft of sunlight when I'd used the 300mm a couple of days earlier. Maybe this isn't a particularly fair test, but I wanted to show you the pictures just to compare. It's not really worth comparing the 300mm with the two Z mounted lenses, as I had to use an ISO of 4000 compared to the 1250 that I could use with the 300mm. It being an f2.8 of course. That makes quite a difference to the maximum f5.3 that I could use with the other two at 300mm. The next day I popped the 2x converter on the Nikon 300mm so that I could compare it to the Z180 to 600 at 600mm. Now, unfortunately, yeah, it weighs 3 kilos, a 602 or 7 pounds 15 ounces. Add that to my Z9 and the whole setup now weighs 4 kilos 866 grams or 10 pounds 11 ounces. That's the equivalent to holding 2 house bricks, but more front heavy. Compare that to the featherweight Z180 at only 4 pounds 11 ounces or 2,154 grams. Yeah, it's a bit heavy. So while I was hoisting that onto the gimbal, I also readied my Tamron SP150 to 600 G2, which to give the full picture that the situation weighs a mere 4 pounds 6 ounces or 2,114 grams. The reason I did that was because I wanted to compare the comparative price. You see, I bought the Tamron for about 1,100 in 2021. Though when it was released in 2016, it actually retailed for about 1,300. You can now get one, a used one, for about 800 quid, but considering inflation, 1,100 would be the equivalent of 1,500 today, which makes the Z180 to 600 pretty equal, as I can get one for about 1,600. Now, before you all disappear off looking for a new Tamron SP bargain, let me say that from the outset, although you can't tell from just looking at these images, bearing in mind they were taken at 600mm, I found that most of the Tamron images were a little soft at the wider aperture of f5 to 6.3 than the other two lenses that were using the same settings. And I will show you that in a minute. On top of that, when I compare the images from the Z180 to the 300 VR2, I have to say that I was surprised and saddened to see that the Z lens is much sharper. Though I do suspect that's more to do with the 2x converter than the 300mm itself, which has always proven pretty reliable. The Tamron though is softer still. The Z180 to 600 is looking pretty good now, isn't it? Pixel peepers, get ready. It's time to show you those cropped in results. Starting with the 300 VR2 with the 2x teleconverter, the eye is a little soft, but there's great detail in the beak and feathers. And you know what, I think looking closely at it, the eye is just beyond the f5.6 depth of field that the 6.3 would have got. User error then. And as it turns out, this result's better than I'd thought. Next we have the Tamron SP G2. At first glance it looks good, but the eye is soft. In fact, the whole image is soft. There's no detail in the feathers whatsoever. These are all randomly selected images, but the story would have been the same whatever I'd chosen from this set. Finally, the Z180 to 600. Pretty sharp, eh? And as we zoom in, there's no loss of quality at all. Look at the feather detail, the beak, the eye. I was really blown away by these results. Let's compare the three crops together. So what are you thinking? Even though I've done my best to hide them behind the titles, try to look at the detail in the feathers. There's amazing quality in the left image, reasonable detail in the image on the right, and absolutely no detail in the middle image. This pattern was repeated in nearly all the images that I compared from all three lenses. The solution to getting sharper images with the Tamron is to stop down the lens to f9 or more, which kind of restricts when I can go out and use the thing. So basically heavy cloud or dusk are out, aren't they? Even at f8 the results are inconsistent. That means I needed to use lower shutter speeds and or
higher ISO settings, risking motion blur and noise. These images were taken at f10, and although they're far better than the ones that I took at f6.3, they're nowhere near as good as the 180 to 600.
Now everything you've seen here was on a gimbal and I used a remote control. So there's absolutely little room for user error or excuses even with me using the thing. Anyway, this video is about the impressive Z180 to 600. And yes, I wish it were a little bit faster, but f5.6 to f6.3 is a little bit restrictive. But if it was saying f4, it would be about 3 times the price and not the bargain that it is at the moment. So to finish, I thought it might be a good idea to show just how much I began to trust this lens. So do you remember, I doubt if you do, that in my last video I said that if I was offered a special opportunity, I'd only ever use a prime lens, and that was my rule. Well, I was so impressed with the Z180 to 600 that I've broken that rule already. You see, I was offered the chance to photograph a wild tawny owl. And not just an ordinary tawny owl, one that's been fed by a photographer for 10 years. And therefore it's got used to flash photography. I mean, what an opportunity. I couldn't say no, could I? Let's have a look at the pictures. If I crop in too far, then yes, I would possibly get more detail with a prime lens. But to get this quality at less than £2,000? I mean, yes, please. Thank you so much for joining me, and if you like this video then please like it, and if you really liked it then you know what to do, please do subscribe. And thank you so much to everybody that has subscribed already, it really means something to me. So until next time, see you soon.